Somebody said to me, is the talk going to be in English? I'm afraid it's not. It's going to be in Northern Irish, which is a completely unique version of English. So I apologise to the interpreters, who I believe are English, who won't be able to understand a word I'm saying. I've been a social worker in mental health for over 30 years. I'm currently a Director of Mental Health Services with Inspire, which is one of the largest mental health charities in Ireland. We provide services for people with mental health difficulties, including advocacy services and recovery-focused services. We also provide services across Ireland on advocacy. And I'm going to talk about my experiences both inside and outside the system in Northern Ireland, and how the system has tried to introduce principles of recovery within the general services. And it's not always been successful, so I'd like to go through some examples that have been successful and others that haven't, and some of the barriers that we've encountered. I would just like to say that I would like a bit of interaction as well, but I'm not going to ask you to jump up and down or anything. But I am going to ask you to shout and interact with me. So, okay. This is a slide I use quite often because I think it's very illustrative of the whole concept of recovery. This is the San Francisco earthquake, the 18th of April, 1906. Agnews Insane Asylum was destroyed. So there was a number of patients killed and a number of staff killed. So, huge, big asylum. And in Northern Ireland, we've moved away from those asylums and developed much more comprehensive community services and also appropriate supported accommodation. What was unique about this was that the patients had to live in tents for a number of years while the hospital was rebuilt. The people who were involved, the patients, actually suddenly found a focus in their lives. They had work to do. They helped. They rescued people. They buried people. What was unique about this was that recovery rates went through the roof naturally. The only different thing was that they were out of the asylum and they were actually focused and had purpose. So to me, that's a very early kind of example of the power of recovery. What I'd like to speak about as well, and I didn't hear it mentioned yesterday, and I think it's unusual, is the whole concept of personal responsibility. This is where I want to get a bit interactive. How many people hate Mondays? Do you not think on Sunday, oh no, I've work tomorrow, I have a lot to do, I have a full week ahead of me? Does nobody hate Mondays? Just a few hands. Okay, there is a concept which is actually gaining some traction, particularly in the UK and Northern Ireland, and it's a concept called Blue Monday. Have people heard of that? Okay, it's supposed to be a scientific and mathematical construct that actually says that you can mathematically work out which is the most depressing day of the year. Okay, so time from Christmas, you've spent all your money, you've eaten too much, you've drank too much, you think you're fat now, all of these things. And they've scientifically worked out that this is the most depressing day of the year. It's actually rubbish. It was made up by a marketing executive to actually sell travel. And this has actually become quite a big thing in the UK. And people are convinced that you can scientifically rate this Monday as the worst day of the year for psychological distress, for misery, for whatever you want to call it. And I think that's an example of us not taking personal responsibility for how we feel. I talk to my staff and they say, oh, I hate Mondays, I get anxious on Sunday night. And I'll say to them, why? That's a full 7th of your life that you're not taking your own personal responsibility to enjoy that day or make the most of it. And I do believe that that concept, and I agree with the speaker before, we all are responsible for our own well-being. And we forget recovery is a concept that can help us all. And I think we should embrace the principles ourselves and also use them within our work and embrace them there. Okay. Oh. Sorry, the technology is messing me about. Okay, this is a definition of recovery. I don't want to go into definitions of recovery and in detail of the principles of recovery because I believe I'm talking to the converted here. I don't think I have to convince people that the concept of recovery should be embedded within all of our services and everything we do. So I don't want to go into too much detail. This definition I quite like. Recovery is about finding a better, healthier, and more sustainable life that recognizes the past, accepts the limitations of the present, and is full of hope for the future. So it's a simple, straightforward definition. And what I find quite incredible is the professionals actually struggle to implement this across services particularly. And I'll come back to this about why I think that is. We're off again. Okay, see, these are some of the concepts that... Nope, it's not up, sorry. Okay. This is some of the issues that we have, okay, in mental health services. So things like based on containment, rewards passivity, limits self-belief, bringing people under control, one-size-fits-all programs. People are protected from risk, we're risk adverse. Compliance is valued, so you must take this, or you may have to stay in hospital. Highlights limitations, and also very low expectations of people. I think if we're working with people and we have those expectations, they're never going to get better. This is a much more positive approach, hopeful with high expectations, emphasizes strengths and builds on strengths. The individual is valued, and that is meaningful and sincere. Information is easily accessible. Choice is enabled. People take risks and have a right to feel. Individually tailored programs, expertise is shared, focus on the person, based on hopes and dreams, supports possibilities, enables self-control, promotes self-confidence. Basic stuff, which we all would agree with and espouse to and hope that we can achieve. Within Northern Ireland, we have implemented recovery, and I just want to mention tools. I think tools are important, but they have to be used with sincerity. So this is a Recovery Star. This is one example of many recovery tools. Oh. Sorry. Oh. It's up here. It's not there. Okay, we have Recovery Stars. We have fidelity tools, including the UCOMS documents. So one particular favourite tool of mine is the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, and that was developed in America in the 1950s. And we've had some work in Northern Ireland with Matthew Federici, who is the current Chief Executive of the Copeland Centre. So he came over and worked with us in some of our services, and actually said some of our services were the best that he'd ever seen. And I don't know if people are aware of this, but Matthew is working towards deregulating RAP plans, because you know RAP plans are very strict in terms of who can use them, the training, all of that. So he wants to take that franchise away from Mary Ellen Copeland and make it available and free to everybody, which would be absolutely wonderful. But that's to come. One concept I think we talk a lot about, and again I think it's something that we struggle with, is hope. So everybody says hope underpins recovery. So why do people not have hope? Partly the system. But I also think people with a negative outlook, with very low self-esteem, find it very, very difficult to have hope, or to think in a hopeful way, or to even look into the future sometimes. I mean, if we're talking about people who are contemplating taking their own lives, I mean, how can you help them think in a hopeful way? So a lot of the work we do in Northern Ireland is about trying to maintain and help people see that hope. So we work on their self-esteem. We get their self-esteem in a better place. We work on the low mood. We work on the behaviour problems to actually get over those barriers that are actually preventing people thinking in a hopeful way. Within Northern Ireland, several years ago, there was a government initiative to try and embed recovery into the general mental health services. And they did it in a number of ways, and I want to talk about some of the successes of that and some of the failures. It was called IMROC, Implementing Recovery Through Organisational Change. And I suppose the benefit of it, one of the benefits was that it was centrally funded. So it didn't rely on grants, it didn't rely on people being innovative or taking a risk. The central government said, here's a pot of money and this is what we want you to do with it. So an example of that, they funded 5 recovery colleges, and they gave the money and funded that for the 5 different health areas. So that's been a great success and has led to huge development in terms of things like peer workers working in those recovery colleges, but also the material that they're producing is widely available to other recovery colleges and other recovery organisations. So that has been hugely, hugely successful. There's been quite a lot of, I'm sure people have heard of the Sainsbury Centre. It's now called the Centre for Mental Health in London. So a lot of the key kind of recovery documents and writings and documents like implementing recovery came from that group, probably starting about 15 years ago. And they have a huge catalogue of recovery materials that have really set the benchmark and actually give us a roadmap in terms of what we're doing within a lot of our services. So it's a hugely valuable resource, but come out at the right time, I suppose, when people were looking at how to implement recovery. I also have to give notice to the peer-led organisations within Northern Ireland, particularly a group called LAMP, Life After Mental Health Problems, who were all experts by experience. Most of them had suffered most of their lives from quite severe schizophrenia. Some were treatment resistant. And they set up this advocacy group and became an adjutant or a thorn in the side of everybody in Northern Ireland. And at times it was they were very, very difficult to deal with. They were aggressive, they agitated, they never gave up, but they were successful. They made huge inroads, and they also were a catalyst for change, huge change. That particular group was actually led by a guy called Martin Daly, who Martin has he says he doesn't have schizophrenia, he doesn't agree. And the doctors have agreed to disagree with him. But he has a schizophrenia where Morse code comes in one side of his head and comes down his right side. And when you talk to him, he would try and counter the Morse code messages coming in by tapping. And he'd tell you very openly what's happening. And he can articulate better than anybody what schizophrenia is actually like to be suffering from it. Martin suddenly had a breakdown, really didn't realise what was happening to him. And he ended up in hospital, lost his job, lost his family. All of the things that happen when somebody is taken into hospital for a long period and they don't really know what's happening, and particularly if they're treatment resistant. Me and Martin worked very closely together and we co-produced a number of projects. But what I found about Martin very, very quickly was, first of all, he's exactly the same age as me. Secondly, he had a lifelong interest in martial arts, and we are both black belts. I was a black belt in jiu-jitsu, he was a black belt in kung fu. He had the same number of kids in the same sex as me, sorry, same gender. And he also, what was really interesting when I was talking to him, when he explained to me what his Morse code voices, his auditory hallucinations were saying, was the exact same thoughts that I was having in my subconscious about myself, about my doubts, about self-doubt, about, you know, am I going to get caught on in this job? Somebody's going to say, he has no idea what he's talking about. So those self-doubts, those beliefs we have about ourselves, we all have them. So I actually quickly realised we were actually two people who had exactly the same kind of lifestyle, same interests. We had the same thoughts. His were come into his head in a slightly different way than mine come into my head. But it gave us a bond, and I kind of, so in the workshop yesterday, somebody mentioned about a light coming on, and Martin talks about that. He talks about the light coming on. And the light coming on was a psychiatric nurse in a hospital ward who one day said to Martin, instead of saying, Martin, how are you sleeping? Are you taking your tablets? You know, have you any suicidal thoughts today? All the usual stuff that he was asked every day of his life, mostly while he was in hospital. She said, you know, Martin, I've had a shit week. And she started talking to him as a human being and a different conversation. And he said that was that moment, that person made that connection with him and everything changed for him. And he started his recovery journey. He's now working full time. He's the service user consultant with the Belfast Trust, and he sits on their senior management team. And he has made a huge impact. I mean, I can't underestimate how huge Martin's impact has been in Northern Ireland. He's changed everything. And he is constantly challenging all of us to do better, to think better, to actually not just pay lip service to the concept of recovery or co-production or involving people. It's to really, really do it and mean it. So that's another thing that was centrally funded, those service user consultants. So all the 5 trusts now, 5 health areas, have a service user consultant who's paid at a very high rate, as in a senior manager rate. And their job is not to provide support, it's to sit on that senior management team and challenge, and constantly challenge, and make sure that the voice of the service user, and I'll get the service user, I don't actually like that term, but that voice is heard. After watching my time, I've been told not to go for time on pain of death. Some of the other initiatives that happened within Northern Ireland was there was a consultation done with people who used mental health services. It was called 10,000 Voices, and it used a system called the Sensemaker. Now, the beauty of the Sensemaker, excuse me, throwing water around myself. The beauty of the Sensemaker was that it was both qualitative and quantitative. So people told their stories, told their narrative, what had happened to them, what had helped them, what had hindered them, what they'd found helpful, what they hadn't found so helpful. And it was all recorded. Now, you can't really scientifically say much about that. But the Sensemaker got those 10,000 voices and actually picked out themes and actually started getting validated, proper information about what was working and what wasn't working. So it was a huge exercise, but really, really positive. Some of the things that come out, and this will be no surprise to anybody, having access to the right treatment and information at the right time, really, really important. Feeling reassured when anxious and being listened to. Being treated with compassion and respect. Feeling safe and having confidence in staff. Being kept up to date about what is happening in their care journey or their episode of mental illness. Having a balance of independence and support. So those were the things that come out very, very strongly. Another thing which was done centrally was that we developed a mental health care pathway, and we developed that with the people who used services. So it was co-produced, genuinely co-produced, about what people should expect from mental health services. And it's now a set of standards that we can actually measure against. So was somebody treated with respect? Were they listened to? We actually have standards and tools that we can actually measure that. So again, that has been implemented, not fully, but it's getting there. We have extensive peer workers, and we have whole teams of peer workers now. We have a resettlement team in Belfast that are all peer workers. And I always remember a story. Do people remember the program The West Wing? Okay, well, President Bartlett, the best president America never had, is Martin Sheen. But he had an advisor called Josh, and Josh and Leo were having a conversation. So Josh said to Leo, he was talking about his struggles with alcohol, and he told him a story. It's based on a parable. He said a man was walking down the street, and he falls down a hole. The sides are so steep that he can't get out of the hole, and he starts to panic. He starts to call, help, help, is there anybody up there? Help. And along comes a man. Turns out the man's a priest. And he says, Father, can you help me? I'm stuck. Please help me get out. And he says, my son, I pray for you. I'm going to the nearest town. I'll send help. The man's standing. He hears another person walking past. He says, help me, I'm stuck. I can't get out. And it's a doctor going to see a patient. And the doctor says, sorry, I can't help you. He says, but I'll get help. Here's a few tablets. He threw some tablets down and says, they'll keep you calm. Don't worry, I'll get help. Then suddenly another man comes along and he says, help me, please, I'm stuck. And the next thing he hears is thud. And the guy lands beside him and he goes, what are you doing? Are you stupid? He said, no, I've been down here before. I know the way out. So to me, that's the power of peer workers. They know the way out. They've been here before and they can help people with that story. And we heard that yesterday in some of the dialogue we had about people sharing experiences and actually showing that they understood on a real level. Okay, when I speak, you think everything is wonderful in Northern Ireland. It's not. It's far from it. We have had problems in terms of implementing some of the recovery into real services and getting real results has been difficult, and it's been for a number of reasons. The first one is austerity. The UK has went through a period of austerity over the last number of years where health services have been cut annually. Budgets have been reduced year on year, usually a 5% or 3% savings. Year on year, that has had a huge negative impact. The health service to stand still in Northern Ireland probably needs about 5% increase every year just to stand still. So a 3% reduction has had a huge devastating impact. Because these budgets have been cut, one of the first things that was done was that nurse training placements, social work training placements, psychology training placements, and doctor training placements were cut. We're now in the perfect storm where 5 years later, we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough social workers. In Northern Ireland at the minute, there's 2,000 nursing vacancies. And what I've found within mental health services is when things start to get really tight, one of the first things that easily slips is recovery, unfortunately. I'll give an example. So most community mental health teams are running between a third and half of all posts vacant. So they're firefighting. They're seeing the most difficult or ill people. They're also changing person-centered practices. So, for instance, CPNs would have visited people at home. They're actually now, because they're so short-staffed, they're actually creating more clinics and bringing people into the clinics rather than seeing them at home in their own environment. So that's having a negative impact, and it's not an easy thing to fix. It's probably 5 to 10 years before we'll actually see any improvements in that. Another issue is professional resistance, and it still exists. I was talking to my colleague earlier, and we were talking about the consultant psychiatrists that we knew who we'd worked with, who are now retired. So the old school are gone, and there's newer, more forward-thinking psychiatrists coming in. Social work training has changed. Psychologists, their training has changed. But unfortunately, a lot of the training was designed by the old school. And we're not sure that that has really embedded into the education system for health professionals. And that is something we need to think about. Northern Ireland is a very paternal, risk-adverse system. So we've had a few tragedies in Northern Ireland. And once we have a tragedy, we have an independent inquiry. We come up with lots of recommendations. And the whole system becomes very, very risk-adverse and very worried that something is going to happen on their watch. Somebody's going to be killed, or somebody's going to die, or a member of staff's going to be seriously hurt. And it actually leads to, I think, a walking back from some of the principles around recovery about risk-taking. And I think that's unfortunate, and probably due to those inquiries being chaired by the wrong people. They're usually chaired by lawyers or older retired doctors who are really old school. So that has been a problem. Stigma is huge in Northern Ireland. Somebody said to me and my colleague earlier, we're very, very friendly. And we are, but we're also very reserved. For instance, my father has never told me he loved me, ever. He's in his 80s. I know he does, but he has never told me because he can't. Because nobody ever said that to him. So he's very, very reserved. Men in Northern Ireland don't talk about their feelings. So 3/4 of the people who actually successfully take their own lives in Northern Ireland are males. We worry in Northern Ireland about a suicide epidemic. Last year, there was just over 300 people took their own lives. And it's been consistent around 300, which is actually about twice of the rest of the UK. We're a post-traumatic society. So, I said to people yesterday, within Northern Ireland, the post-traumatic stress rates have been likened to, it's exactly the same in the World Mental Health Study as Rwanda. So the genocide that happened in Rwanda, in Northern Ireland, the post-traumatic stress syndrome is as bad. A lot of the people who take their own lives in Northern Ireland are people like me. So we're really concerned about the young men, 18, 19, take their own lives. It's a big loss. They have all that lost income, all that lost opportunity, everything. But one of the highest rates of suicide are men, mid-50s, bit of an alcohol problem, relationship breakup, and that's one of the biggest groups that are completing suicide within Northern Ireland. As well, only 70% of those people are known to mental health services. So we're missing something there. We're missing a whole group of people who aren't linking with services, but are actually completing suicide. Just watch my time. Some of the speakers tomorrow are talking about language, and I think language is very, very important. We had some debates earlier about the importance of language. I think that professional language actually stigmatizes. And I'll give you some examples. And these are real examples that I've heard, and I've heard them used. So, I've heard somebody who was living at home with their parents being referred to as their current placement. Okay? It was their home, it was their parents' home, but the professionals called it their current placement, meaning that they were just placed there in some sort of experiment and they'd probably go somewhere else. I've heard a nurse describe somebody who was making their dinner, making something to eat, as developing excellent independent skills. And I know I recognise this terminology, but when I think about it, it's so destigmatising. When I get angry, I might cry. But if you're mentally ill, it might be described differently. It might be compulsive behaviour. It might be overreaction. It might be all sorts of things. It's a bit like if I eat 3 chocolate bars. I'm a greedy pig. If somebody in some of our services eats 3 chocolate bars, they're pushing boundaries. If I shout and swear, somebody makes me angry, I'm angry. But that will be challenging behaviour. Not sure. A favourite of mine, if I choose something, as I did for lunch, I'm choosing something. It's a preference. Am I really making a choice? You know, it's a description of it. I just chose something for my dinner. Friends, we all have friends. We all enjoy friends. But in my day-to-day work, I don't say, I was meeting with my circle of support today. I'll say I met with my friends. My free time, my hobbies, I like mountain biking, I like riding motorbikes. I don't do martial arts anymore, I'm too old, can't recover. But they're my hobbies, my interests. They're not part of a person-centered plan. They're not written down anywhere. I just enjoy doing them. I have an extensive collection of punk rock music from when I was a punk in the 70s. But I have them ordered in alphabetical order. Am I obsessive or compulsive, or do I just like things ordered? Finally, I'd just like to end on the last one, person or citizen. And we use the term service user. In Northern Ireland, there's a real backlash against that from people who use our services, who use mental health services. They will be right in your face and say, I'm not a service user. You're working for me. And don't you forget it. And I like that assertiveness because we tend to have this thing about service user, and we all know what it is, but we never think of ourselves as service users. I'm a service user. I use my GP. I use other medical health services when I need them. I use a library. I use all sorts of things. I don't refer to myself as a service user. And yet we constantly do it every day about the people who use our services. And I think we have to challenge those stigmatising uses of language. So, that's really me. As I say, I didn't want to come up and talk too much about this is recovery, these are principles of recovery. I just wanted to talk about some of the themes, but also some of the experiences of actually implementing recovery and some of those barriers. We had an interesting talk yesterday where we were looking at some of the plans for the development of services in the Czech Republic, and it was really interesting and insightful because the speaker actually hit all the nails on the head. That's a term from Northern Ireland. But got everything right about what potentially could go wrong, because it will. And I've actually seen lots of services across Europe, and I'm taken by the same issues coming up and up and up again. And it is about the barriers to implementing recovery. And really, to do it right, you need to be aware of those barriers, because when they come, and they will come, at least you'll be prepared for them. But be assured they will come. And the speaker up here earlier said, we have to keep fighting for recovery. To me, it's common sense. It's a very simple, straightforward concept at its basic level, but we still have to keep fighting to implement it. Is that a bell? Is that me? Perfect timing. So, thank you all for listening. I'll leave you with a lovely Irish kind of saying. May you be dead for a full half hour before the devil knows you're dead. Get it? No. Thank you. And could I finally say, Martin was talking about DNA. I recently had a DNA test. So I'm 45% Irish, 45% Scottish, and 6% Viking. Who would have thought it?
Thank you. Thank you. It was Billy Murphy. Thank you very much.